Welcome to this explainer. It's actually kind of funny when you look back at history. The Founding Fathers, including George Washington and his famous farewell address, warned fiercely against the dangers of political factions. They absolutely despised the idea. Yet political parties became the very architecture of the government they created. Why? Well, because managing a modern republic requires solving a massive, unbelievably complex organizational challenge.
330 million. That is the population of the United States right now. I mean, just imagine trying to get 330 million people to universally agree on literally anything. How do we structure taxes? How do we manage healthcare, secure borders, or project power on the global stage? Getting that many people to agree on solutions to these massive challenges isn't just difficult, it's mathematically and practically impossible.
So how does America actually decide? How do you take all of that noise and channel it into definitive action? Well, the answer, whether we like it or not, is the political party. They are the essential engines driving the entire American political system.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover why political parties exist. Then we'll look at the history of America's two major parties. Next, we'll explain the Democratic Party, followed by the Republican Party. After that, we'll explore elections and third parties. And finally, we'll debate the two-party system itself. Let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, Why Political Parties Exist, or Organizing the Chaos. Imagine walking into a voting booth without political parties. You would be completely overwhelmed by thousands of isolated candidates. At their core, parties function as a crucial cognitive shortcut. They strip away the noise. By organizing elections, nominating specific candidates, and proposing really clear policies, they group similar ideas together. They basically do the heavy lifting of turning absolute chaos into a defined, actionable choice for the everyday voter.
Moving on to Section 2, America's two major parties, a brief history. Now, while many parties do exist, the American system has been absolutely dominated by two political juggernauts for over a century and a half, the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democratic Party traces its roots all the way back to the early 1800s, making it one of the oldest active political parties on the planet. Then you have the Republican Party, which was formally founded in 1854. And what's really fascinating here is that the Republicans actually started out as a highly successful third party. They essentially destroyed and replaced the collapsing Whig Party. And the most important takeaway for today? Over the last 150-plus years, these aren't static entities. Both parties continually adapt their platforms and shift their voter coalitions in response to changing American realities.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Democratic Party explained, looking at their policies and spectrums.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it outlines the modern democratic philosophy, which really hinges on active government involvement. You see this materialize directly in their biggest policy pushes, fighting for universal healthcare access, writing robust environmental regulations to combat climate change, strengthening social safety nets for vulnerable populations, and actively promoting civil rights protections. They generally believe that collective governmental action is the absolute most effective tool we have to solve systemic societal problems.
But, as we all know, political beliefs exist on a spectrum. The Democratic Party is absolutely not a monolith. It relies on a very broad and sometimes pretty fragile coalition. So there is this constant active friction between moderate, establishment pragmatists and a highly progressive wing that's pushing for much faster, sweeping structural changes.
Shifting gears to Section 4, the Republican Party explained, their policies and spectrums.
The modern Republican platform operates from a distinctly different viewpoint, one largely rooted in the Reagan-era consensus. Their main focus? Championing limited government intervention, especially when it comes to the economy. They really focus on trusting free market principles, prioritizing deregulation, lowering taxes to spur economic growth, and maintaining a very robust national defense, all while emphasizing individual responsibility. And just like the Democrats, they have to manage their own broad coalition, balancing the priorities of moderate conservatives with more populist and staunchly right-wing factions.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic right here. Ultimately, it is a philosophical clash over trust. Democrats generally trust collective, governmental action to solve complex societal issues, while Republicans trust the individual and the free market to drive society forward. It's a constant balancing act between these two totally distinct worldviews.
Let's look at Section 5, Elections and Third Parties, or how the machinery actually works. So how do they actually compete? The electoral machinery basically operates as a two-stage race.
First, you have the party primaries, which determine the specific nominee for the party. Now, because primaries typically draw the most passionate, highly engaged voters, candidates are often pulled toward the ideological extremes of their party just to win that nomination. But then comes step 2, the general election. This is where those exact same candidates frequently have to pivot back toward the center to capture the broader voting public and actually win the office.
Now, you might be asking, what about third parties? Groups like the Libertarians or the Greens absolutely exist and introduce fresh ideas, but the mechanics of the American winner-take-all electoral system make it incredibly difficult for them to win at a national level. However, they still play a vital role. They frequently act as spoilers or force major shifts in the national conversation. I mean, just look at how Ross Perot forced the national debt right to the center of the 1992 presidential race.
Finally, Section 6, debating the two-party system, looking at the critiques and advantages.
So the crucial point is that there is a massive trade-off at the heart of this entrenched system. On the plus side, it forces organization. It gives voters clear, distinct choices and builds a framework where a specific group can be held accountable when things go wrong. But the cost is deep polarization. By forcing infinitely complex, multi-layered issues into two rigid, opposing boxes, the system inherently crushes nuance and drives some really intense partisanship.
Here's the bottom line for us today. You don't have to pledge allegiance to a political party to understand its mechanics. But understanding the foundational philosophies and the electoral machinery driving these major players is the absolute first step to navigating reality. Simply put, to understand politics is to understand power.
Every single vote represents a voice, and the machinery we just explored is exactly how those voices eventually become laws. Thanks so much for unpacking this complex machine with